here, Desert Botanical Garden member Harold Dornbecker. He has done a fabulous job chairing today's event. And so that we may share it in the future, we are recording this event. Today, we are celebrating the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance, or the CASCA as we affectionately know it. This was a Desert Botanical Garden initiative based on a desire to go beyond the garden boundaries and to contribute to the community. It's been 8 years of inspiring collaboration to protect, conserve, and promote desert parks and preserves of Metro Phoenix and of Central Arizona. Today, there are more than 60 member organizations as partners, and none of that would have been possible without the generous support of the Nina Mason Pulliam Charitable Trust. The keystone project of the CASCA has been the Regional Open Space Strategy for Maricopa County. We call that the ROS. It is CASCA's shared vision strategy that was developed by its 60 partners. Implementation of ROS objectives include a green print, a mapping portal that contains natural resource and open space data. Desert Defenders, a regional collaboration focused on equipping community scientists to identify and manage invasive plants. The Sonoran Seed Collaborative, a pilot project for garden studying and growing native plants for restoration efforts. And finally, the Sonoran Insiders, a social media ambassadorship that is helping us to reach a larger audience with responsible use and stewardship messages. All of this effort is focused on building champions for Sonoran desert conservation and connecting people with nature. But a great program needs a great leader. And for the last year and a half, the CASCA program director has brought an understanding of the importance of the human element in conservation. She brings tremendous energy to the work of CASCA and jumped in feet first from the very beginning. She's stewarded the invasive species work from bufflegrass blues to the region-wide Desert Defenders. And she supported the concept that became the Sonoran Seed Collaborative. She also innovated on the Sonoran Ambassadors Program to link CASCA with the National Forest Foundation. And so I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Ariana Rashke to share her vision of CASCA today and into the future.
Thank you so much, Tammy, for that beautiful introduction. Before I speak, I would like to acknowledge that the work of CASCA, an initiative of the Desert Botanical Garden, would not be possible without our partner organizations, including our steering committee members, the Arizona Game and Fish Department, the City of Peoria, Maricopa County Parks and Recreation, the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, and the Urban Land Institute. Furthermore, I would like to honor Anya Quiroz, our engagement coordinator, and my partner in CASCA. She's just as much a force for what we do here as me, and I couldn't do this without her. Together, we all seek to build the bridges of collaboration in order to honor the legacy of the many conservation pioneers that came before us. People who looked at Camelback Mountain not as a foundation for a rising city, but as beautiful in its own right. Perhaps they saw the whisper of what that mountain would become to our community, a refuge from an often confusing and sometimes scary modern world, a place that helps people stay healthy and a symbol of everything the Valley of the Sun is and has been, a linchpin that belongs to everyone and every living thing here. I, of course, could go on. I grew up playing in the foothills of the Phoenix Mountains. They were a place where I could explore nature without being afraid. Yes, there were choyas and rattlesnakes, but these mountains were also close to home and a place that I learned to know like the back of my hand. To call them a playground would do them a disservice, but I did play there, letting my imagination grow along with my love for nature. They also taught me to respect the power of the natural world, for the little pieces of it could hurt even while they felt like home. This was my backyard, and the urban mountain parks remain the most important part of Phoenix to me. And I'm not alone. The many mountain refuges tucked away in the city and nestled at its edges are home for anyone who grew up near them, and they capture the hearts of the people that move here as well. I would be surprised, in fact, if anyone here hasn't enjoyed a morning away on one of the trails here in Maricopa County, or picnicking in nature with your family and friends under the unique skyline provided by all of our beautiful mountains, or enjoying the animals that continue to persist in our urban spaces because of them. They're an indelible part of who we are here in Central Arizona, but that doesn't mean that the fight for these spaces is over. Consider now the infamous stink net. We've all seen it, whether we know it or not. Its little yellow buttons are everywhere in Central Arizona now, when just a few years ago, that wasn't the case. It isn't clear what its impact on our beloved mountains will be just yet, but like bufflegrass, it has the potential to serve as fuel for wildfires, fires that are all the more real to us now in 2020 than ever before. In fact, every time I drive the beeline now, I look out at a sea of saguaros that likely won't survive their burns for more than a few years. But because of the CASCA partnership, I know that we aren't giving up on our beautiful saguaros. Many of our partners are working on studying this problem of wildfires and saguaro survival, and others are seeking ways to keep the forests of this charismatic cactus alive. And we at CASCA will be there to support and link these initiatives with all the unique resources of our network. That's the beauty of CASCA. While we lead the way in many of our collaborative programs, we also have the freedom and the purpose to support essential work going on in every nook and cranny of Central Arizona in a way that few other organizations can. From the White Take Mountains to the little islands of Shadow and Lookout to the vast expanse of Tonto, we're here to connect, help protect these precious places, and equip our communities to join the effort of tending to these wild spaces in our midst. But as I began, so I shall end. We don't do this work alone, and in fact, we can't. Just like the desert itself, we need your help to keep going and to keep growing. So thank you so much for being here.
Phoenix, Arizona is part of one of the most amazing and biologically diverse deserts in the world, the Sonoran Desert. From 1900 to 1950, the population of Phoenix grew more than 20-fold, from 7,000 to 145,000. Mid-20th century visionaries recognized the implications of rapid growth in Phoenix as early as the 1950s. They set out to create a system of preserves focused on the desert mountain habitats. The Metro Phoenix population now exceeds 4 million people, and urban development is considered one of the major factors contributing to the designation of the Sonoran Desert as one of the 12 most threatened landscapes in the United States. Across Phoenix and Maricopa County, the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance, CASCA, has issued a call to action and mobilized collective engagement of the community to raise awareness, gather information, and provide stewardship for our open spaces. The Alliance has generated a collective vision for a sustainable system of large regional parks, trails, and connected open space. The Regional Open Space Strategy, ROS, as well as the Greenprint, guide and support this vision. The Alliance is working to protect additional landscapes, inform the community about the significant and lasting value of open space, assisting in developing a consensus on appropriate uses for these areas, and developing mechanisms for the long-term care of both biological resources and recreational elements. This work includes Desert Defenders, a collaborative community science program that maps and removes invasive plant species. Sonoran Seed Collaborative, a project dedicated to growing, testing, and finding the best practices for propagating native Sonoran desert plants that can then be harvested for seed and future restoration projects. Sonoran Insiders, a social media ambassador program focused on stewardship and responsible use of public lands, and the Metro Phoenix Ecoflora, a community science project that's documenting urban biodiversity, increasing appreciation of plant life, and providing insight into bigger urban ecosystem questions in Metro Phoenix. CASCA is actively engaged in supporting healthy ecosystems and providing beautiful, safe open spaces for recreation, education, and relaxation. Our natural landscapes and open spaces create a sense of place and hold the unique natural and cultural heritage of our region. We are coming together to care for our open space for good and for all. We invite you to learn more and get further involved by visiting casca.org to subscribe to our newsletter, sign up to volunteer, or make an additional gift.
Wow, what an amazing video. Thank you to all of you involved in its creation and production. Good day, everybody. I'm excited to see you all here on our special conservation celebration. I'm John Sefton, Parks, Recreation, and Community Facilities Director with the City of Peoria. Through my work, I've been afforded the opportunity to serve our community in a number of ways, including as Vice Chair of the Arizona State Parks Board, as an Associate Faculty Member of the Arizona State University, as a past president of the Arizona Parks and Recreation Association, and for the past 18 months or so on the steering committee for CASCA, with a purpose on representing and providing a perspective from the municipal staff network. I was also fortunate to be invited early on to play in the sandbox that proved to be the shaping and the structure of what ultimately became the Regional Open Space Strategy, the ROS. With the ROS as its foundation, vision, and action plan, CASCA and its network has been working heavily to create a headway in our area's conservation and sustainability. In my short time behind the camera today, I wish to demonstrate and affirm the value of the work being accomplished through CASCA's team. From the planning and the using of the green print to the programmed bio blitzes and the Desert Defender work days, and the field research being accomplished by undergraduate and graduate students and the citizen scientists, CASCA is already making a profound impact in delivering accomplishments that benefit our environment, our wildlife, our flora and our fauna, and almost as importantly, us. I also wish to proclaim the importance of the CASCA efforts. I can't approach my parks and recreation work in good conscience without spending solid intention on ensuring that our communities have access to our natural Sonoran beauty. In public survey after public survey after public survey, our citizens region-wide express their interests and priorities in open space and access to trails and the outdoor experience. Our parks and recreation profession maintains a role and a responsibility to advocate and to act for the conservation and stewardship of Arizona's land, water, and natural resources. I'm honored to call the Desert Botanical Garden and the CASCA Initiative and Network partners in this endeavor. I truly believe that CASCA serves as an extension to and support of our municipal parks and recreation departments. It's an extension with expertise, with passion, and with proficiency. Moreover, I truly see the potential and the opportunity for a future that has a connected and robust inventory of natural ecosystems that ultimately support healthy people, healthy neighborhoods, and a healthy Central Arizona community. Your being here today shows how our collective intention, engagement, and investment can and will truly equate to a conservation legacy tomorrow. Many here know that it was in the early 1920s that thoughtful leaders took action to purchase the first acres of the City of Phoenix's Salt River Mountains, now known as the South Mountain Preserve. Those intentions, engagements, and investments made 100 years ago solidify for me that the future is now. And as those thoughtful leaders, those 1920s leaders, J.C. Dobbins and Mrs. John Hampton and H.B. Wilkinson, they have their names written into Phoenix's conservation history books today. We honor and recognize a special someone for their service. Here's Board President Tammy McLeod with more on the 2020 Desert Botanical Gardens Conservation Award. Back to you, Tammy.
Thank you so much, John. You know, the Desert Botanical Garden was founded with the goal of conserving desert plants and habitats. And the garden has stayed true to that mission for more than 80 years. As exemplified by the collaborative nature of CASCA, we recognize that successful conservation is never done alone. It takes all of us. And so 4 years ago, the garden created the Conservation Award, to recognize individuals and organizations beyond the garden who innovate and excel at conserving plants, animals, and the environment that we all depend on and love here in Arizona. This year's award winner is a conservation professional through and through. His work aligns completely with his personal values, and he holds a conservation ethic as his North Star. I have had the privilege of knowing Pat Graham through my own conservation studies, which allowed me to look into both his work and his heart. Pat joined the Nature Conservancy more than 19 years ago, and his work has led to the revitalization of the Arizona chapter. His career is characterized by his belief that we are not protecting nature from people, we're conserving nature for people. Pat is also a thought leader who fostered innovation amongst his team, and his focus on collaboration and relationship building has led to major conservation wins in Arizona. Some of these include the Forest Restoration Initiative in Northern Arizona's Ponderosa Pine Forest, which supports forest health and helps via tens of thousands of acres of thinning. The Verde River Offset seeks to recharge aquifers in connection with the SALT and the Verde Alliance, and it engages a diverse range of stakeholders in protecting Arizona's precious water resources. And most recently, the Healthy Cities Initiative, which seeks to address heat vulnerability in Phoenix metro area in cooperation with many community members. Pat is also working to tackle the impacts of climate change on Arizona's ecosystems and communities by supporting the transition to alternative and clean energy sources. He has positively changed the landscape of conservation in Arizona for the better, and we are more than honored to be able to present him with the Desert Botanical Garden's Conservation Award. Here is my friend, Pat Graham.
Well, thank you very much. Greatly appreciated. Thank you, Tammy, and thank you all, Ken and Brianna. Many good memories, having events and shared collaborations with the Desert Botanical Garden, and Casca is the right organization at the right time for the Valley here. So I'm really grateful to be selected for this award. Nature's been an important part of my life since I was very young, kind of ran in my family. My father's research actually documented the effects of spraying DDT on life in rivers many years ago. And that study ended up being included in Rachel Carson's impactful book, Silent Spring. So it's from those beginnings that I feel fortunate now to be working in the third most biologically rich state in the nation, in Arizona. I also feel fortunate to be working for an organization that allows us to be innovative, creative, and to think big. It's really a privilege and a responsibility for those of us who work in organizations like the Nature Conservancy or the Desert Botanical Garden or Casca, because we depend on the generosity of others, people who choose to invest their money in us so we can make a difference. I'm also really thankful for our volunteer leaders, our board of trustees at the Conservancy. They're so generous with their time, both sharing their experiences, making connections for us. A critical part of our accomplishments. So I thought I'd just share briefly kind of 3 lessons that I've kind of learned through my years of doing this work. And one is to persevere. Some might call me at times relentless, but you really need to stay focused on a worthy goal, but also remain flexible in your approach. Second is to take the time to build bridges between people, the kind of bridges that are needed to create solutions that will really last. And third, and for us, outcome-oriented people, for others, this may not seem like such a big lesson, but to enjoy the journey, enjoy the wonder of nature, and to really enjoy each other's company along the way. So I want to thank those who nominated me, my accomplishments or their accomplishments, whether it's restoring healthy forests, keeping rivers flowing, and farmers farming, or bringing nature back into our cities in ways that improve the quality of life in underserved communities. But as Tammy said, we face real challenges today and due to the warming of our planet. And I'm going to use this opportunity to plug very briefly a statewide Arizona Thrives Alliance that will be soon launched early in the new year, where together we're working to try to accelerate the transition to clean energy. So I wanted to end the way that I end a lot of my remarks, and that's talking about hope. Hope is not a state of mind. Hope is something we do every day with our hands and our hearts. And together, we're creating hope. So thank you very much. Appreciate this recognition.
Congratulations, Pat. Hi, my name is Marie Long. I'm the Director of Education at the Desert Botanical Garden. And it's my pleasure this evening to introduce Gary Nabhan for the Conservation Celebration. Gary is considered a pioneer in the local food and the heirloom seed saving movement. He co-founded the innovative Native Seed Search in 1982, which continues to connect people with the native plants of the Southwest. Gary is also known for his pioneering research in agricultural ecology and ethnobotany, as well as his literary works. He is the author of numerous books, many focusing on the interaction of biodiversity and cultural diversity of the arid binational Southwest. Many of you may be familiar with Desert Smells Like Rain, one of his first books that introduced me to Gary. Something interesting you may not know about Gary is that he first worked at the Desert Botanical Garden as an intern with Dr. Gentry in the herbarium in the summer of 1978. In 1984, Gary returned to the garden and served as the Director of Conservation Research and Collections for 7 years. In 1990, Gary received the MacArthur Award, recognizing him for the work he had been conducted with Dr. Gentry that resulted in contributions to conservation of the genetic and cultural heritage of the Southwest region. Gary has held numerous positions and made other significant accomplishments throughout his career. He served as the Director of Conservation and Research and Collections at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, founding director of the Center for Sustainable Environments at Northern Arizona University, and currently serves as faculty at the University of Arizona as a research social scientist with the Southwest Center, serving as the Kellogg Endowed Chair in Southwestern Borderlands Food and Water Security. There, he founded the Center for Regional Food Studies and catalyzed the initiative to have UNESCO designate Tucson as the first city of gastronomy in the United States. On a personal note, Gary and I have a unique connection that we actually both worked at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum and the Desert Botanical Garden, but not at the same time. However, we have overlapped professionally with Sonoran Desert ecological, educational, and cultural conservations, along with building authentic indigenous partnerships on both sides of the border. Gary lives in Patagonia, Arizona, on a 5-acre homestead to the southwest of Tucson. He farms a diverse set of heirloom fruit and nut varieties from the Spanish Mission era and from the Middle Eastern homelands of his Lebanese ancestors, as well as heritage grains and beans adapted to arid climates. We cannot be more pleased to have Gary, a prolific nature writer and activist, at this year's conservation celebration, sharing the launch of his newest book, The Nature of Desert Nature. Please welcome Gary Nabhan.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Gary?
You're on mute.
Gary, you're muted.
let me say that again. Grateful to be here on a night when Patrick is being honored. The Nature Conservancy and Patrick's guidance to all of us has really been a bright spot in Arizona conservation in the last few years. And I also need to say that I've been inspired my whole adult career by the conservation legacy of the Desert Botanical Garden, going back to its first director, George Lindsay. It was way ahead of the curve in bringing conservation into public discussion in Arizona. And now with Casca, the collaboration that is happening here that we're celebrating tonight is a bright spot because of how we all feel that we may be living at a time when America seems more divided than ever before. Casca's work is a salve of showing how conservation and collaboration and cooperation can bring us together, not divide us. And so I'm really grateful to be with you all tonight. The second thing that I want to say is that it was a pleasure to work with the Nature Conservancy and Desert Botanical Garden on the first ever press conference about the need to conserve desert plants in this state. We collaborated with Arizona State University and Desert Museum on putting together the first list of plants at risk in Arizona. It's almost a precursor of what Casca's about. But what we didn't imagine at that time was all the great on-ground participatory research collaborations that you all have made possible. So my hat or my sombrero is off to all of you for what you've been doing that we could not have even imagined 30 years ago when we had that first press conference here on Desert Botanical Garden grounds. I've been asked to talk tonight, not directly about this little book that's just come out that I'm having trouble showing you, so I'll just put it aside, but about what motivated me to ask 25 friends to join together with me to compile an anthology about how the desert provides a variety of values to our society and how, in fact, it shapes each and every one of our identities of those of us who live in the desert and love the desert's distinctiveness. And I should say that when I thought about the deep motivation for doing a book like this, of the multicultural voices that celebrate the desert and value it for different reasons, I remembered coming to the Desert Botanical Garden after getting my PhD at the University of Arizona as a starving graduate student and having my first job as a professional in the desert. And my brothers, who were amazed that anyone could spend 6 years in graduate school for a master's and PhD just studying deserts, said, "My God, you can get a job doing what you're interested in, studying deserts? Why would anyone hire someone whose only specialty is dealing with those empty wastelands that you have in Arizona?" Well, I didn't have any answer for them then, except I was used to being kidded by my brothers relentlessly anyway. But now it seems like this remarkable thing that we could have not foreseen in the mid 1980s, that 40 to 50% of the land surface of this planet is getting hotter and drier and reaching desert conditions. This last year we had 53 days over 110 degrees here in Arizona in the Phoenix Valley. And compare that to when I was here at Desert Botanical Garden 30 years ago when with Adrian Hendricks, a Gila River Pima intern at the Desert Botanical Garden, we ran and walked 250 miles from Phoenix down into Sonora. And we thought it was hot then. We had 50 days over 105 degrees. And now we we've added another 5 degrees for that same 50 days of the hottest temperatures, including what may have been one of the 3 hottest days in the history of recorded weather on this continent, a 130-degree day in Death Valley this year. So ironically, desert science, desert conservation, and desert studies has become a growth industry rather than just a few of us being attentive to the issues and values of the desert. It seems like everyone is realizing that the deserts are the laboratory of the future of how we're going to live on this planet. And we have to show the rest of the world how to do it right, because there's deep traditions here in Arizona, unbroken traditions of desert farming and desert foraging that go back tens of thousands of years that we can draw upon as a guide. The second question that I was given by the garden staff was, how did I choose the 25 contributors to this anthology? Because they're not classic nature writers, or some of them not desert scientists at all. Why would I choose a group of people from 5 different cultures, from many different professions, to write about their views of what is of value in the desert and how the desert itself has shaped their identities? And I have to say that I think we need to stretch what we teach the public about the value of the desert to help them imagine ways of looking at desert landscapes that they may have never considered, even though the kinds of people that come here to the garden and to other places in the valley love deserts, love desert wildflowers and cacti, but we're all limited in the ways we reach out to look at the desert with fresh lenses. And so I invited some unlikely partners in ways. First of all, I thought that Native American voices should be included, and we have everyone from a 75-year-old Tohono poet to a Seri Indian who received the first master's degree in natural sciences of anyone from his community in Sonora, that's just written a 3-volume novel about Seri Indian history. But I also included out-of-the-box thinkers that you might not think would have much to say about a desert. One of the world's greatest oceanographers, Paul Dayton, grew up in the desert north of Tucson, became a faculty member at Scripps, and has spent more time under ice in the ocean in Antarctica than anyone alive. And yet, after surviving a harrowing experience of being under ice without a wetsuit on for more than 1.5 minutes, something that could have killed anyone else, Paul emerged up out of the water and wanted to get back to the desert. And he's done some of the greatest long-term studies of desert dynamics since then. I also included the former poet laureate of Mexico, Homero Regis, who created something called the Committee of 100, artisan scientists for human rights and conservation, that annually take on a cause in Mexico or in all of the Americas to fight for its recognition as something vital to the future of humankind. A landscape artist who was once a mammologist in the Great Basin, who decided to shift from biology to doing landscape art in the dying rivers of Arizona. A photographer who is a student of the physics of light and how desert light is as distinctive as any light on the planet. A West Texas cowboy poet and songwriter. A former border patrolman who now teaches high school students how to write about their own place. And a Hispanic sunflower expert who chose not to teach in a biology department, but the Institute for Native American Arts, so that Indian youth could learn about the shapes and textures and colors of desert plants to inspire them in their own art. So these are people with completely different angles on what the desert means, how it functions, how it moves our hearts and minds, and how it shapes our own identities. And let me read you just a few of their comments. These are very brief excerpts from 25 of my dearest friends, cultural creatives from the Sonoran Desert, Chihuahuan Desert, and Mojave, that I think have a lot to teach us about new ways to look at the desert. Alberto Mellado, who I've known since age 14, is the Seri Indian who's recently completed this 3-volume novel on his people's relationship with the desert in Spanish and in his own language. And he's now protecting and restoring mangroves along the desert coast of Sonora. And he calls the desert Heno, personalized, or a persona of a living desert being. And so he writes in the voice of the desert itself. As Heno, a wild desert place, I am distinct among all my relations, for I have grown a skin of sand and stone, of plants with spines and thorns, of leaflets small but fragrant, of minuscule pools of water that sparkle like gems in the sun. Together we form something altogether different, a place easily distinguished from all the rest on this planet and in the universe as a whole. Or Octaviana Trujillo, a Yaqui educator, historian, and human rights activist who was born just 5 miles south of Desert Botanical Garden in the village of Guadalupe, a Yaqui village just west of Tempe. And she wrote, our ceremonies are dependent on our access to and care for so many desert plants and animals. They have become vital elements to our culture. And so our ancient traditions of the desert live on to this day. The desert still gives us everything: food, drink, medicine, shelter, and protection, and ultimately the distinctiveness of our very own way of life. So think about that. Instead of seeing the desert as empty space that needs development, or as a wilderness, or as an unproductive landscape, she's saying the desert gives us everything. It nourishes us. My friend Jack Leffler is in his 80s now. He's been the best friend and confidant of great Western writers like Ed Abbey and Gary Snyder. And he's also recorded more desert sounds in his sound archive than anyone alive today. And he says this about deserts. Of course, deserts have lots of open space, and their inhabitants, floral, faunal, and otherwise, live in less controlled, less crowded conditions. But those of us ignominiously known as desert rats are lured to deserts just as pollinators are lured to blossoms, like the blossoms behind me here. I feel like a pollinator in front of this big saguaro flower. We can only hope that by doing so, something bears fruit. A seed drops here, and that it may grow into a mighty notion or satisfy a deeper urge to linger and enjoy desert life in its fullest. I also included desert contemplatives from different traditions, Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, and Native American in this group. And one of them is Father Dave Denny, who I went to college with and partied with in northern Mexico on field trips when we were just 20 years old. And now he's one of the great writers about desert contemplative traditions worldwide. And he says this: what I love about the inner deserts, the ones within our hearts and souls, is that they have taught me, by depriving me of my narrow worldview, I can be introduced to unimaginable space and beauty. Hollowed out, I have learned to be more hospitable to other worldviews and faiths. Ruben Martinez, an Emmy Award winner who's made films, books, is a performance artist and a poet, says this: "My greatest challenge is to find that place where the God of the desert dwells. I've begun to sense that alongside wanting to be a witness to the journeys of the many migrants and refugees who cross the desert, I have also been seeking spirit in the desert. Indeed, the migrants themselves have been telling me about this all along, that that's what motivates them. Their journey is a pilgrimage across the desert. Every step is an act of faith." And then I earlier mentioned Paul Dayton, the desert born and raised oceanographer and Antarctic explorer, who said that as a young boy, he was bullied by other kids and he went into the desert as a refuge. And this is what he learned there: "The desert has taught me patience as I observe seed banks that germinate only once in 40 years after an effective rain event. I then began to notice theretofore unexpected neighbors around me, like the huge roots of the coyote cucumber vine, that were alive and well, even if unseen, for 40 years until an unusual rain event prompts them to flourish. I want to be like that coyote cucumber vine." Tessa Bilecki, another desert contemplative, says this: "It touches me so deeply. What do I learn from the saguaros? Endurance, adaptability, generosity, a sense of mystery and awe. The longer I look at the saguaro cactus, the more I noticed how many of them carry such beautiful scars. So their greatest lesson for me, and perhaps of you, is that the healing of wounds can happen." And finally, one from my friend Stephen Trimble, the Ansel Adams Award-winning photographer. "The dry air over the Southwest deserts has much to do with the low relative humidity and the low haze. And because of that, it allows less scattered light and sharper definition of objects, and extends our visual range to well over 100 miles, farther than we can see in most other landscapes in the world. Still, there's a magic in desert light that does not yield to simple physical explanation. Our brains are the deciding factor. Color doesn't exist until we see it and think it. And so none of these writers are environmental determinists. It's all about the interaction between our capacities, perceptual and cerebral, our senses, and the desert itself. Ben Wilder, who's the director of the oldest desert lab in the world up on Tumamoc Hill, sort of sums it up for all of us when he says, "Searching for how the desert came to be and where it is going is like hunting for the proverbial snark. It is a magical path that takes one to the heart of the desert and out to its outermost limits and then back again. I still find myself chasing these secrets, staring over the edge into vast spaciousness." So I'd like to end with just a little tiny quote from my own long meditation in the book about how over the 5 centuries of written word about the desert, our views on the desert have changed so radically that what people thought of deserts 100 years ago when the Carnegie Desert Lab began in Tucson, all of those initial ideas have been debunked, and a new view of the deserts, a non-dualistic view that sees competition and cooperation as 2 sides of the coin, is emerging that's so completely different from the nature tooth and claw look as deserts as inhospitable places where everyone was competing for water that we had as scientists a century ago. And I just want to offer you all a challenge. I encourage you all to see, smell, hear, taste, and touch the desert as if you have been gifted with new eyes, noses, ears, mouths, hands, and minds. And when you recover your wits and relocate your place in that enchanted desert, perhaps you will enter into a fresh and exuberant relationship with everything that sticks, stinks, stings, swings, springs, or clings in an arid landscape. Thank you very much, and blessings to all of you who support Casca and the great work that the Desert Botanical Garden continues to do after decades of diligent attention to the desert and its life forms. Thanks again.
So Gary, thank you so much for that. We have a question coming through the chat right now that says, could you describe a transcendent experience that you have had while out in the desert? And surely you have had many.
Well, one of the most remarkable ones was in the Pinacati Biosphere Reserve just south of Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, where I was asked by two Tohono activists to take them to the emergence place in the Pinacati that they had heard about from their grandparents. And they knew more about it than I did, of course, through their oral histories. But I had happened to stumble upon volcanic tube coming down from the top of Pinacati Peak one time. And I saw quickly as I peeked in that there were effigies and offerings left there decades before, and I didn't know how recently anyone had visited this cave or lava tube. So I went back with them and let them go in first and do their own prayers. And then after a point, they said, well, you're welcome to come in too. And I went 75 yards crawling in the dark back into this emergence place with them, all of us completely silent. And then, as if we already knew that social distancing would be coming around the corner someday, we stayed about 10 to 15 yards apart way back in that lava tube and just sat for a half hour. And it was the most remarkable feeling of being cradled and held by the earth that I've ever had. I could hear no human sound other than my own heartbeat. And it was as if my heartbeat and the earth's heartbeat were the same.
That's lovely. Thank you. If you wanted to have each of us do something so that we could honor and contribute to caring for the desert so that our grandchildren can experience it the way that we have, what advice would you give to us?
I am most concerned that all of us over 50 years of age devote the rest of our lives to facilitating opportunities for younger people to feel comfortable in the desert, away from human trappings. It doesn't mean that we need to go outside the cities, the mountain parks that Casca is taking such good care of are examples, but giving them a taste and a sense of comfort with the wildness of the desert rather than being afraid of the desert. You know, so many kids now are not just trapped in houses during the summer because of COVID, but because of the intense heat. And I think it's adding to the fear that it's not just not lions and tigers and bears, but diamondback rattlesnakes, Gila monsters, and scorpions in the desert, that we need to give them a sense of comfort in the desert, that they're not only allowed to explore the desert, but they'll find unforeseen delights there that they couldn't have imagined. And so all of us over 50 need to forget about what our own egos want us to do and be in service to the younger people who are going to make sure, better than our generation has, that climate change doesn't proceed in a way that terminates the many lives that create this enormous biodiversity that's all around us here in the Sonoran Desert. And so I think we should give up our own ambitions and attend to the helping younger people complete their visions of living in the desert in a capable and inspiring way.
With all of its sticks and stings. How can we help change the minds of people who think that the desert is empty?
You know, I think those tropes or stereotypes are largely among people who just haven't had the time to spend time in the desert. You just get out there wherever it is and you see this abundance all around you, whether it's tarantulas out on a stroll right before sunset, that obviously can't do you any harm once you see how tarantulas move. Really, the same thing's true with Gila monsters. But it's also that we are bombarded by social media in a way that it takes some people now 15 to 20 minutes to just begin to look and smell and feel what's different about the desert. And so I think we need to get out of our heads and back in our senses. And that's the great thing about how Marie Long approaches environmental education wherever she works. That's a great thing about all the docents at the Desert Botanical Garden. They bring people back into their senses so that they can delight in the desert. And when that happens, fear falls away.
Very nice, very nice. So here's another question, and this is relating to the issue of hope. With the places that are on the slate for loss, such as Oak Flat, Top of the World, Devil's Canyon, Arnett Creek, and many others that have been marked for destruction by the Resolution Mine, how can we culturally approach this in a way that is of service to the young and that offers more hope?
Well, as Patrick knows, down in Patagonia, Arizona, we're facing unprecedented threats of large-scale mining. And I have to say that it's taken me a long time to understand this, but the only way to deal with those potential threats is to engage, not disparage. That to walk up to the planners of the mines and say, can I take you out and show you the treasures here that aren't in any other place? Can you spend some time with us and see that the Nature Conservancy area in Patagonia, the first private reserve in the state, has people from 50 states and 14 countries coming to it every year, all 50 states by April. That these places are beloved, and that if you want to have a mine here in a way that doesn't diminish the value of these places, let's have dialogue. But rather than thinking that anyone's the enemy, I think we need to make them our friends and enter into dialogue rather than disparage people who we may think we don't share any values with. And I think that's a starting point for all of us, that we see so much division in this country now, and most of it is looking at the 10% difference in what we value rather than the 90% of what we all care about, that I think John spoke to, that when we talk about open space in urban areas, you're not going to find too many people who disagree with you.
Great. Gary, can you comment on climate change and the effect that it's having on endangered species in the desert?
Well, it's there's two things to look at, hotter and drier, which is the long-term trends. And when I was at the Desert Museum just a few years before Marie was there, I remember one summer, the herpetologists are coming up and saying, you know, we've just lost 5 desert tortoises on our grounds this week. I said, desert tortoises are perfectly adapted to deserts, right? They said, well, here we have so much caliche that they can't dig down deep enough to estivate, be dormant during the summer in places where all the water in their body isn't wicked out by the heat. So even these plants and animals that we think of that are exquisitely adapted to desert conditions are having a tough time of it. The urban heat island effect is influencing everything in Papago Park, not just the plants cultivated in the garden. And so we've seen a stepwise decline in the vegetative cover right outside the gates of Desert Botanical Garden because of urban heat island events. And then where I still work 40 years after, well, 50 years after first going there, in the Seri Indian villages on the coast of Sonora, in one of the richest cactus forests in the world. The houses of the families that I was first hosted by 50 years ago are falling into the ocean due to ocean level rising and the greater frequency of hurricane fringe storms. So we've created one of those houses. It's half in the ocean now and half on the beach as a climate change museum where the family welcomes anyone to come for $150 a night into a house that's half fallen into the ocean and experience climate change. If you're a climate change denier, spend a night down there and contribute the $150 a night to their efforts to restore mangrove lagoons and seagrass meadows that will help buffer them from the rapidity of ocean level rising and hurricane fringe storms. And so I think we all need to realize that this is not something that's happening in the future. It's upon us now, and there's ample evidence of that. How you interpret it, the causes of climate change is your own mix of thought and emotions, but no one can deny that we're all bearing the brunt of it, and we need to wake up to that.
And so we have another recovery question, which is there anything that we can do to save or recover saguaros injured by the recent desert fires?
You know, buffalo grass and other exotic grasses like the pennisedum grasses that we have up on Camelback are a constant threat. We can pull them all out and they come back and they help spread those fires. And I'm grateful to people in the Nature Conservancy over the last quarter century, like my dear friend Peter Warren, who were the first to recognize that these exotic grasses are changing the fire frequencies. I think we can't stop that scalding when there are those grasses, but we can work to make sure that those grasses don't take over every desert place. I was just down at the Day of the Dead ceremonies in Mexico. My wife was doing COVID protection training. So we celebrated Day of the Dead in the Mexican community. And to some extent, rather than thinking that we can keep everything from dying in the desert, I think we have to deeply grieve and celebrate what we are losing. Make monuments to them. Bring it to the attention of people who may not have noticed that. And remember Aldo Leopold's warning that every ecologist lives in a world of wounds. And it's only when we recognize that woundedness that we can act in support of the healing that can still go on given our current conditions.
Thank you for that. Of all of the perspectives that you gathered in your most recent book, The Nature of Desert Nature, which one surprised you the most?
Um, Patrick and some of the others of you may know my dear friend Larry Stevens, who I went to undergrad classes with at Prescott College, and right after the first Earth Day, where I worked 50 years ago as an intern. And from the very day that both of us got into the desert, Larry started spending every weekend in the Grand Canyon. It has sort of become the mind of the Grand Canyon. He studied hydrology, geology, plants, birds, scarab beetles, butterflies, and he's more competent in all those sciences than any fish, than any desert ecologist I know of. And yet what he said in his essays is, I remain dumber than a bag of nails about what a desert truly is. That it's so complex that, as a great British geneticist said, nature is not only more complex than we think, it's more complex than we can think. And so his piece, after being one of the greatest desert ecologists that we've had over the last 50 years, is that he remains humbled day by how little we know. And I think we all need to share that humility.
Gary, thank you so much for being part of this celebration. I really enjoyed your talk and your comments. And for those of you who have not yet received a copy of The Nature of Desert Nature, I encourage you to do so, to buy a book. The holidays are coming. If you already have a copy of Gary's book, please consider another. And we'd encourage you to do so through one of our local book vendors like Changing Hands. I want to thank everyone for coming today. You are part of the first virtual celebration here. And we know we live in a metropolitan area with more acres of open space than anywhere else in the country. And that's why we're celebrating. Just as Gary said, this is something to celebrate. This is the legacy that we've inherited. And the work of KASGA and all of us is to embrace this legacy and to ensure it continues. We must leave it to the future generations in the same or better shape than we received it. So if you have not yet contributed to support KASGA, or if you are so moved by Gary's remarks that you'd like to make another gift, I welcome you to do so using the link provided in the chat. If you're interested in other ways to support KASGA, please visit their website at kasga.org. You'll learn more about what they do and how you can join in. And please keep an eye out for the Save the Date Conservation Celebration of 2021. We're hopeful that we might all be back together then. Thanks to each of you for caring about our unique Sonoran Desert and for doing your part to protect it. We hope to see each of you at the Desert Botanical Gardens very soon. Thank you.
much.